everyone. Welcome to Games, Guts, and Gore. Today I'm joined here with writer, director, actor, Dean Jacobs. How you doing, Dean?
I'm great, man. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Good, man. Good, and I appreciate you coming on. To get things
Definitely.
started, why don't you familiarize the audience with yourself a bit? Tell us a bit about who you are and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I have a name and it is Dean Jacobs, originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I now am in Los Angeles, California. I've been here for about 12 years. Started in this industry as an actor, as a young kid, stage work, children's theater. Um, Went to college for video production, communications media. Graduated and decided to try my hand at the industry again. And as an actor, went on a few auditions in Pittsburgh, sort of got the ball rolling. Decided if I wanted to make a go of it, I was going to go to Los Angeles. So that was 12 years ago as an actor. Um, and I've always been a writer, but for years it was just sort of for myself. But at some point, I decided to branch out and try to get some of my own work made. And that's what I did. So that brought us to the multi hyphenate I guess I am now, which is producer, writer, actor, and director as well. So that brings us about up to date.
Well, you can't beat all that. It sounds like moving to LA was the right move.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I think overall, everybody has a different experience with LA.
yeah,
It
yeah,
can chew people up and spit them out, but
yeah.
yeah, if you work and continue to work and don't give up, the idea is that you'll get to a place where you want to be.
Yeah, that's nice. Well, that's a good sentiment at least. So,
Right.
what one of my favorite questions to ask everyone was what was your first introduction to horror?
The short answer, the answer that I always give is Night of the Living Dead. I'm a kid from Pittsburgh again, and so that film, George Romero, meant a lot to that city, and it's well known by the people in that region as well. Obviously, it's well known by everybody, but my dad showed it to me. I have a Halloween birthday, October 22nd, so my dad showed me Night of the Living Dead when I was 10 or 11 years old, and that stuck with me. The other thing I was thinking about is I have an older cousin who I didn't see him that often. A couple times a year, we'd go down south, and he had black and white Universal monster movie posters on his wall.
Mm,
Dracula and Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Wolfman. And those always intrigued me. The long shadows, the darkness, those old school horror films. So that sort of was one of the first things that I remember as far as horror goes, is seeing those pictures and being intrigued by them. And
yeah,
Night of the Living Dead.
that's cool. Those old, especially those posters, they killed it with those old posters in particular. I mean, those
Oh
movies
yeah,
still hold up today, so I think it kind of speaks volumes on their impact.
definitely for sure.
So, what was the moment you kind of realized, yeah, like the entertainment industry is for me? What made you know you wanted to be a part of it?
I mean, I was always a performer. When you first start acting, when I think I probably started when I was like 8 years old or something like that. And the first time you're on a stage and you hear a reaction from an audience, and it's that visceral feeling of like, oh, I'm getting this reaction from this thing that I'm doing. It must mean that I'm good at it. Um,
Yeah,
that was one of the first indications that, like, yeah, I would like to pursue this. But the entertainment industry, and especially as an actor, it's it's not something that everyone looks at and says like, oh yeah, that's obtainable. A lot of people see it as a lofty dream, but
yeah,
people do it. It's a profession, so why couldn't it be your profession?
yeah.
So that's what got me there.
That's cool. That's cool. And I think it's a feeling and sentiment a lot of creatives feel what you touched on there, where when you make something or a part of something or act in something and the audience reacts to it, it's very encouraging and it's a very different kind of feeling that you don't really feel doing, other things. It's very rewarding in that sense. So that's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's I've experienced similar feelings in athletics, but
Yeah.
it's a high that you want to keep chasing. You have this amazing experience working on a project or a film or with this group of people, and you chase that high. You want to do it again, and ideally, you make it, your career.
Yeah. Yeah. That is cool. So you've been very busy. You got an upcoming film coming called Water Rights. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's all about?
Yes, definitely. Water Rights is my second feature film. My first was The Trip. We might talk about that in a little bit, but Water Rights is my sophomore effort. We're staying in the horror genre, and this is going to be a little bit of a folk horror, simple setting, quiet resort lakefront community with something nefarious underneath. Um, I had a friend living in Lake Arrowhead, California, lived there for about 10 years. Lake Arrowhead is a small resort community that sits on a lake high in the San Bernardino Mountains, which is about an hour and a half outside of Los Angeles. And so we would go up to his place, nestled in the woods, walking distance from the lake, serene, beautiful setting. But through the course of our visits, I just started noticing some peculiarities, some strange things about the town and the lake and the history of the town as well. So in my head, it's that scratch, like, oh, I think there might be a story here.
Yeah.
Um, so I took some of the truths from that town and their past and the stories, and I wove them into my fiction to bring you Water Rights, which is like I said, folk horror, and I've been pitching it as a little bit Wicker Man, a little bit Get Out, a little bit Midsummer, some of those, folk horror films that we all love or I love.
All of those movies, I mean, they're kind of the stamps of folk horror. So I mean, that's cool that you're kind
Definitely.
of blending a little bit about all of those into it. Specifically in regards to the history, what are some of those stories and what about it drew you in?
Yeah, it does have a long, rich history. It was first basically built up by loggers, because it's plentiful with resources up in the mountains
Yeah.
there. So it was a logging community at first, and then it was sitting on a lake. So they were using the natural resources and decided to expand and make it a resort community and attract the crowd, like the Los Angeles entertainment crowd, to come up for the weekend. Um, and so there were some stories of like the Bugsy Siegel mob days where the mafia used it as sort of like a weekend getaway. So there's some, and I know Bugsy Siegel owns some buildings up there too. So there's a
Wow.
theory that maybe there's some stash cast in some hallways or some behind some walls up there. But yeah, like I said, it's been around for over 100 years.
Yeah.
And some mysterious circumstances. The town of Lake Arrowhead has burnt down twice,
Wow.
intentionally. They decided to burn their entire community down more than once. It's a burn to learn. It's a burn to learn program, is what they called it. You can look it up. It's all true. But for me, as a writer of fiction, like that's just a great excuse to like take this real life thing and be like, well, that's weird enough to make something out of it.
Of course.
And then
Yeah.
the lake itself is private. It's owned by a small group of people that live there, and they took over the rights to the lake in the 1970s. And unless you have a lake pass, water rights, you can't go on the
Mm,
lake. You can go up there, you can look at it, you can get real close, but almost all of it is completely fenced in. And so
wow.
that again is like, oh, that sort of feels like
Peculiar.
a cult.
Yeah.
So to me, that was enough to write a story.
Wow. Wow. I could see what drew you in. That is
Yeah.
bizarre. Why would they burn it? What was the point of especially intentionally burning it?
Yeah, I believe the burn to learn is, I think they were concerned with the structural integrity of a lot of the buildings in like the town center. So
I
I
see.
think the thought was rather than trying to salvage any of it and spending money that way, get rid of everything and start
Got
completely
you.
over. But in
Got
my
it.
mind, it's like, oh, well, if we have some things we want to cover up, why don't
Mm.
we just burn the town down?
Yeah, it's suspicious.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you mentioned some of the inspirations from, those classic folk horror examples, Wicker Man and all
Yeah.
that. So aside from those, what other pop culture related inspirations uh, are for the film, and where can we kind of see them reflected?
Yeah, there's a little bit of Americana to it.
Hmm.
Again, it goes sort of back to that simple, quiet setting, rural America.
Yeah,
But there's also, um, like folk horror does have sort of like a natural aspect to it, like from the
yeah,
earth sort of feel to the films. Um, and so that's sort of some of the impetus for where I wanted to go with the story. Um,
yeah,
and I brought it to there's going to be the culmination of the film sort of should look beautiful because it's going to reach its climax basically July 4th weekend in this beautiful pristine Lake Arrowhead setting, and we're going to see
yeah.
fireworks over the lake. That's sort of where I was going with it.
That's cool. That's cool. And I mean, not only do you have all these cool inspirations and all this history behind it, but I mean, you have two incredibly iconic names in horror involved
Yeah.
with the film in the film, Lynn Lowry and Michael Berryman. I mean, what is it
Yeah.
like having them acting in the film, and what was the feeling like when you heard they were officially signing on?
Yeah, I mean, to answer the first question, it's an honor to
Yeah.
have them act in this film. Um, Obviously, we haven't touched down for principal photography yet, but I've been in communication with both of them. Lynn is a wonderful lady; she is so sweet. And as far as talent and recognition within the genre, you can't ask for much more than Michael Berryman and Lynn Lowry.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
super excited to work with them. And then going back to the second question, to have them agree to be in the film is incredibly rewarding.
Yeah.
When I send my work out to anybody to read, it's vulnerable.
Hmm.
But then to get that confirmation that I did something good and people like it, and then people the likes of Michael Berryman or Lynn Lowry, or in my last film, Doug Bradley, Hannah Fierman, these people, um, to be in my films, it's rewarding, and it lets me know that I'm doing something right.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And I mean, you touched on it earlier with the trip. Was there anything in filming that you learned from, or fine tuned, that you are bringing forward into this film?
Yeah, definitely. I learned a ton making that movie, and I'm not the only one. A lot of us learned a lot in the process of making that movie. Um, but when it comes down to it, budget determines a lot of things. So if
Yeah.
I felt like I was overworked on the trip and I was wearing too many hats and I was being pulled tight, it was because of budget constraints.
Yeah.
Indie horror filmmaking, we're not making these movies on huge budgets. So you
Yeah.
have to do everything you need to do to get the movie made. But going through that with the trip and seeing all the things that we could have done better with a little bit more money or a little bit more research sources, I'm definitely taking into water rights. So it was a great testing ground for this next film to see what we were able to do with the budget that we had and try to level up, make it a
Yeah.
little bit better in every aspect that we do. um, and so yeah, it's easy for me to look at where we might have come up short for the trip and
Yeah.
try to rectify that with water rights. um, and I think everybody, you hope that whatever it is that you're doing, you do the first one well, but you do the second one better, and so on.
Yeah. For sure.
That's the intention.
Nice. Well, that's good. It makes sense. I mean, it sounds like you got a good rap on it, and it's cool. It seems like you work with kind of a similar crew, from what I gather.
Yeah, for sure. My cinematographers are coming back. Friends, they were friends before colleagues, so I'm happy to work with them. Evan Sloan, one of the actors who's going to be in Water Rights, is also a producer on the film as well. He was one of the principal actors and a producer on the trip. So glad to have him back. And yeah, I mean, I just like to work with the people that I'm comfortable with. If you
Yeah.
have this rapport with these people and you trust their creative instincts and you've been on the ground together and you've made it happen, why not try to get that group back together and keep that unit together and making art? So that's the way I feel about it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's a really nice sentiment, friends before colleagues. I think that
Yeah.
alone is going to make anything better. So that's really cool. So, like we touched, I mean, you are not only directing it, acting in it, but you also wrote it. Do you feel when writing, whatever it may be, a movie, script, whatever it could be, do you feel writing, having that vision, having the idea, this is how the characters act, this is where I want it to go, this is how I want this scene to look, what it looks like in your head as you're
Mhm.
writing it? Do you feel that it translates and makes the job of directing easier?
Yes, I do. I'm a very, when it comes to the art that I make, I am as hands on as possible because I know what my vision is, and if I can guide it to fruition as specifically to my intention as I can, then that's what I'm going to do. But also, I think that there is, when it's in your head, it's easier. You know, your imagination can take you anywhere. When you're on set on the day, you can only work with the means that you have to work with.
Yeah.
So, if you want someone, a big explosion or someone jumping off a roof, these are just, hypothetical scenarios. Your imagination might be able to write that, but your $60,000 budget might not be able to accommodate that.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
it's sort of sometimes finding the balance of that scenario that you created in your head and how it's going to play out in real life. But if you're a smart writer, and that's one of the best pieces of advice that I was given early on, if you're a smart writer, you write that way. You write knowing your limitations. Um, my first film, it was this big Major League Baseball involved buddy comedy. And I sent it to one of my friends, and he was like, I really like this. It's great, but this is like at least $10 million movie. If you want to make a movie, write something on scale, write something that you can go out and make. And so that's
Yeah.
what I do. And you have to sort of always keep that in mind when you're on the ground getting it made.
Yeah, I mean that's a great piece of advice. I could
Yeah.
see how, like you said, you can get carried away imagining things. That's
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we all have fears or nightmares as children, but have being a horror director slash writer. Did any of those nightmares or fears from your childhood ever influence any of your approaches to horror?
Yep. Great example. My first film, The Trip, there is a portrait of a woman that hangs on the wall in the house of the film. Um, and she's woven into that story. And that picture of that woman is a real picture of my great grandma, maybe great great grandma, that hung in my childhood home. And
Mm.
it scared the shit out of us when we were little. When we had friends come over, we would hang out in the basement and we would tell ghost stories. And I would tell them that this woman comes out of the picture at midnight and walks around the house. So when it came time for me to write my first horror script, that was one of the first pieces of imagery that I came to, was that
That's really cool.
woman's portrait hanging in my childhood home. So that's one of the early things that was a horror influence to
Yeah.
me. And that sense of foreboding, that sense of dread that we all sort of feel when we're a kid in the dark, where something might be around every corner or something's hiding under your bed. Um, that thing, that prick in the back of your neck is exciting. Um,
Yeah.
and so that was an early feeling. Then I was like, I felt it, and then I saw it replicated on screen, and it was enticing to me. So the horror genre, that does it for me.
That's cool. That's really cool, especially it being a relative to include. That's really cool. Wow.
Yeah.
So, if you could collaborate with any historical figure, whether they be living or dead, to create a horror film, who would it be and why would you choose them?
Oh boy. Great question. I've not been asked that before. William Castle comes to mind. because, you know, he was a certain, you know, he kind of reminds me of like Trauma films or Lloyd Kaufman,
Yeah.
in that he had his own sort of niche in the genre, and he made these sort of campy, schlocky, um, kind of over the top horror films. And he was great at marketing. William Castle would do things like put out insurance policies on the audience, where if you don't make it through the film, we'll cover your life insurance. And he would put like vibrating buzzers under the seats, or like send
Yeah.
smells into the theater. So those sort of things to like bring the audience into the experience was always really exciting to me. And then obviously George Romero. He's an idol. He chose to make his filmmaking home in my hometown, Pittsburgh, and he's one of the first directors that I saw his horror films, and one of my favorite horror directors. Night, Dawn, Day, Survival. I mean, I love all those films. Not to mention Martin, Night Riders, all his other films. And then as a filmmaker, in relation to George Romero, it's easy to admire him. He
Yeah.
took a small group of people. I think it was like 6 people for the Night of the Living Dead. You can look it up. I might have the numbers wrong, but it was essentially 6 people put up $1,000 each, $6,000 to make that movie. And they found an abandoned location and spent, I think, almost 2 years shooting it. But look what that movie gave them. You know,
Yeah.
that's a testament to artists coming together and doing what they need to do to make the thing that they want to make.
That's really cool. I had no idea about that even. That is crazy. That's
Yeah.
$6,000. And I mean,
Hmm.
like you said, that is, I mean, it's one of the most, not only in terms of horror, but I mean, that's probably one of the most well-known films of all time. I mean, everyone, even if you haven't seen it, you have at the very least heard of it. That is insane.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was
Wow.
groundbreaking. Absolutely.
Did you ever have the opportunity to meet him?
No, some of my friends did. By the time I was pretty heavily involved in the industry, I was already in Los Angeles, and he died pretty shortly thereafter. So no, I did not ever have the chance to work with him or meet him, but I was blessed to work with Laurie Cardill, the female protagonist from Day of the Dead, as well as John Amplis, the lead actor in Martin, and he's also in Day of the Dead, Night Riders. He was Ramiro's casting director. So, my six
That's
degrees of
cool.
separation between myself and George is 1 degree, but I did never have the pleasure of meeting the man himself.
Wow. Well, that is the next best thing. That's really cool that
Right?
you could work with the people he worked so closely with. That's awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Touching on the games parts of Game Guts and Gore, are you a gamer at all? And what was kind of your first introduction to games?
I don't play video games. Never really had. That's not really the way my brain works. So I never really got into them. Plus, my parents were never, I mean, we didn't have cable growing up. They weren't really reticent to buy, all the new game systems that were coming out. So I
Yeah.
had Nintendo, and that was about where it ended for me. But my lead actress, Katie Bentz, she's a Twitch streamer. She also does voice acting, and she's a gamer as well. She was one of the lead voice actors in a pretty popular video game series called Life is Strange. I'm
Oh
not too
yeah,
familiar with it, but I know it's a pretty popular game, so she's garnered a lot of attention because of that. So I guess
that's cool.
that's one of my connections to the gaming industry.
That's cool. That's cool. It's a good game. Those those games are all kind of based off of choices, and there's a bunch of different outcomes that can happen. Kind of depending
Mhm.
on what you choose to do. So that's really cool. It's definitely a very popular game. I remember when it came out, it was kind of this more under the radar type game. I don't think people
Yeah.
expected it to blow up and be as big as it was. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it did blow up. I mean, she's gotten a ton of work because of it. She goes to the conventions because of it. So yeah, it's definitely been a help for her career.
That's sick. That's sick. So, for a fun question, I mean, if you could insert yourself into any classic horror movie, which one would it be? And if you had the opportunity to, how would you change the story?
Well, I think all of us especially in the horror genre, watch these films and watch these characters going through all these sorts of scenarios and thinking, I wouldn't have done that, or like I
No,
could
yeah,
have done that better, or I wouldn't have died there, I would have survived. So broadly, pretty much every horror movie, much like everybody else watching them, I feel like, oh, I would have beat the zombie apocalypse. But that's probably my answer, Zombieland. I would probably put myself in Zombieland because they looked like they had a ton of fun. I don't know if I would change the ending because I really liked the way they culminated that film. I enjoyed the sequel too, but I'd probably put myself in Zombieland because
yeah,
they had some fun.
yeah. It's a good film. I mean,
Yeah,
they're fun, which
yeah,
is I feel like that's a key element to hit, especially with zombie films, because I mean, there's serious zombie films that are good too, but I mean that like a little bit of a zany
yeah.
element in it always,
That's why I love
kind of
The original Dawn of the Dead so much
yeah,
because it
yeah,
has that perfect balance of like seriousness and then sort of camp and humor.
yeah,
I think it's the perfect balance. Yeah, zombie movies have to have a little bit of all of that. I agree with you.
yeah. Return of the Living Dead, that's always a good one too.
Yeah,
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 they're great, and I mean that's probably. I know a lot of people kind of have like almost zombie fatigue. I know, especially when Walking Dead kind of blasted off, they were
yeah.
making like a bunch of zombie films, a bunch of zombie shows, a bunch of zombie video games.
Hmm.
I know people were kind of getting over it, but I think a lot of them departed from, that fun zaniness. I think that it was almost trying to be a copycat a bit to Walking Dead. So I
Yeah,
think I think especially those classic zombie films like, all these Return of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, they have something special about them that some of these modern ones sometimes I think miss the mark on.
yeah. I think so too. I mean, I think that probably extends past zombie films too.
Yeah.
It's easy to take a pre-existing idea and make a new cookie cutter version of whatever the thing was to begin with. That's the horror genre has plenty of that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So, just to kind of wrap things up, can you tell us about any other upcoming projects you may be working on?
I have plenty of scripts on the shelf, but water rights is my focus right now. We have 12 days left on this Kickstarter. We're 78% funded. I anticipate moving into principal photography right after the Christmas break when the weather breaks in the mountains. So that's my focus, and it's going to tie up most of my energy and my time for, probably the next 2 years. But I do, once I'm wrapped with that, I'm ready to move on to the next thing. I have a prequel written for my first feature, The Trip. So I might return to that storyline, or maybe I'll leave the horror genre for one. I mean, I'll definitely come back. Horror is my home, but I'd like to do other things as well.
Yeah, branch
But
out.
right now, water rights is my focus. I mean, The Trip basically spent 2 years working hard on that. It's now out with Terror Films. It's pretty much everywhere you want to see a movie. So that's the intention with water rights. Just work it till it's done and out there, and then move on to the next thing.
Awesome. Awesome. And just to wrap it all up, what is the best way for the audience to support you?
You can support me by supporting my films at the Trip Film, at Water Rights Film, Rites. You can find that all across social media. Um, and you can support me by supporting other independent artists. You know, there's a lot of content out there, and there's a lot of hardworking people doing this, and a lot of them doing it for not a lot in return. Um,
Yeah.
so you can go out there and find those movies and support those independent artists. And that's how you can support me. And like I said, the Water Rights Kickstarter is almost done. If you have a chance between now and whenever this airs, or between whenever this airs and the end of the campaign, to check it out, it's all on the social media. So give it a look.
Awesome. Well, guys, you heard what Dean said. I will be linking, the Water Rights Instagram, the Kickstarter, all that good stuff down in the bio. So make sure to check it out. Support Dean. And Dean, I really appreciate you joining us here today, man. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you, Damien. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, man, and I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I will see you all in the next one.
A podcast of terror, a haunting delight, unveiling the dark